Zenglop the Podcast, Conversations with an Aesthetic Alien. A podcast where we talk about music, poetry, and psychogeography. A little bit different today. I am down in the living room. I'm usually upstairs in my office, which, although it isn't a studio in any sense of the word, in terms of soundproofing, it is separated from the front of the house, which means it's a bit isolated from the street noise. I know you occasionally pick up a dog, my dog barking, or a siren from the street. Today, you can expect to hear a lot more traffic sound because the living room, the windows of the dining room, living room area that I'm sitting in looks right out on the porch and on wonderful Penn Avenue. Those of you who've been keeping up with my YouTube channel, The Urban Bellaboke, will recognize some stretches of Penn Avenue from those videos, including the part that's immediately outside my house. So I do try to live anonymously, but in the greater interests of sonic psychogeography, it's possible to piece together from the video evidence and from my podcasts where I live. Although since most of you listening to this are actually friends and family, you already know where I live. So stop over. Not right now because I'm recording, but in the next hour or so, feel free to, come over and have a cup of tea. Today, in this episode, I'm going to recount a road trip, actually a train trip, a railroad trip that I took a few weeks ago. There's been a bit of a delay in getting this episode out. If you recall the previous episode, I mentioned that I was releasing it a bit early because I was going to be traveling. I had two trips back to back. One was this one that I'm going to talk about, where I saw a lot of music and concerts in New York. And then the other was also in New York, but for work. And I'm not going to talk about that one because I can't imagine that the life of a program manager in a corporate office is at all interesting. I take that back. I actually know that many of you are interested in the nuances and logistics of program management. It may not be the primary topic of this podcast, but it is always interesting, I think, to try and apply a certain level of awareness to that kind of work. But that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Today I'm going to talk about this trip. So it begins at 7 a.m. on a Friday when I got on a train. The train from Pittsburgh to New York is a long one. Not necessarily because of the distance, although it is, 200, 600, I don't know, some hundreds of miles. But it takes 10 hours because of the Byzantine management practices of the railroad system in the United States. Having said that, it's still a really pleasant experience to ride on Amtrak, particularly if you spend a few extra dollars and get the business class ticket, which is what I did. So there's the train trip out. Friday evening, I met my father in New York. So Friday evening, we went to the first of the concerts I'm going to talk about, which was a performance by Philip Glass and his ensemble. And then on Saturday, we listened to Wagner, two Wagner concerts. One was a matinee performance of Parsifal at the Met. And then, because that finished at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we grabbed a little bit of dinner and then went back to Lincoln Center and heard the New York Philharmonic give a concert performance of the first act of Valkyrie. So I'm going to talk through all of that. The nascence of this trip, or the precipitant for this trip, was to go see Parsifal. Right? So a few years ago, I've mentioned before, my father and I went to a Ring festival in Washington, D.C., where they presented the whole Ring cycle in 5 days as it's intended to be performed. And although I've enjoyed Wagner and studied Wagner, until that event, I hadn't really understood why people go crazy for it, or really what he was trying to do. But that immersion flipped a switch in me. So then when we saw that the Met was putting on Parsifal, which I'd seen before, but it was before that Wagner flip switch took place, we decided we'd meet up in New York for that concert. And because, like I say, it was the matinee, it started at 11, it was finished at 5, so it was a good long chunk of time. I happened to notice that same evening, the New York Philharmonic was giving this other concert, and so my father actually suggested, since we're there, why not do both? Would it be too much to do both? Too much Wagner? And we decided that it wouldn't be too much Wagner, which actually turned out to be true. It was not too much Wagner. It was just the perfect amount of Wagner in a single day. And then realized that as we were coming in on the Friday evening, Philip Glass was performing with his ensemble at Carnegie Hall. And he was performing one of his early ensemble pieces. It was his ensemble piece, Music with Changing Parts. I had gone there. I think we both thought that he was giving one of his solo piano recitals, which would have been cool because I've been in the last couple of years kind of banging through the etudes, which would probably be what he played, or part of what he played. But the ensemble performances are awesome, and it was like the core of the ensemble. So Philip Glass is 80. Michael Reisman, who's the director, the conductor of that group, is also about the same age. It's half a dozen of the people of his contemporaries from the 70s, performers and composers, were there, and then they were augmented by a small choir and a couple of other instruments. So anyway, so we looked at that, realized that was happening, and thought, well, he was taking the train up from where he was coming from. It was due in around 2-ish, and my train was due in around 5-ish, and the concert was at 8. So would it be too much to also see the Philip Glass Ensemble the night before? And we decided no, it wouldn't be, and it turned out that it wasn't. So this whole trip, right, this whole trip is what I'm going to talk about. One of the reasons that I was excited about the train trip, there are two reasons. The first is that I have a real emotional connection to riding on trains. Riding on trains often shows up in my dreams. If there's some kind of signification to that, I don't know what it is, but there are a few elements that often recur in my dreams, and trains are one of them. Interestingly enough, blue whales are another. And when I say often, I don't mean that every night. I don't mean frequently. I mean within the course of the dreams that I've had in my life that I would consider memorable, in the sense that I remembered them and still do. Whales and trains are two things that are often in those kinds of dreams. And I do think that it's because when I was a boy in England, I took a train to and from school. I lived near Warrington, for those of you who want to look up a map of the northwest England. I lived near Warrington and took a train into Manchester, where I went to school for a couple of years before we moved to America. And I enjoyed that train ride. I particularly enjoyed the train ride on the way home. I have real memories of it being dark and seeing lights off in the distance that were probably factory lights or refinery lights, but there was still then, and probably still now, fairly large sections of unconstructed farmland or wetland of some kind between Manchester and the stop that I got off at. And so in the distance, as you were moving along in the dark in the train, you could see these lights that were, imagine up on high on a refinery or on some kind of warning post for low-flying airlines, that kind of a look. So they had this very abstract floating distance feel that has stayed with me as a particularly beautiful image. I don't think I would have called it beautiful when I was 11, but I was enchanted by it, and still am. That's one reason I think even today I enjoy train rides. The other is that it's comfortable. I find the rocking of it pleasant, in a way that if I were on an airplane and the same level of rocking was taking place, I would be losing my shit and thinking that we were destined for, a fiery death at LaGuardia. But the pacing and the spacing of trains I enjoy. And I have had success in the past using long train rides to write. I am thinking in particular of a while ago now, 6 years ago, I was giving a keynote talk at a conference at UNESCO on intercultural messaging. And I wrote that paper, although I had many, many notes. I actually wrote the paper on the Eurostar from London to Paris. And since then, have actually sought out train rides when I'm at a point where I really want to do some writing. And I'm at that point with the essays that I have referenced in previous podcasts. So I thought February, I'll have a good draft and I'll work through it. Now it turns out I didn't have as good a draft as I wanted because, as you'll know if you've listened to the podcasts, it's taken me a long time to write them. But I did have I had enough material that I knew I'd be able to sit and write. So here's what I had in mind. The train ride, I was going to alternate writing in short doses, 20 minutes at a time, so that my psyche doesn't freak out. 20 minutes at a time, and then I would shift. And the other assignment that I wanted to take on for this train ride was to read through the introduction to Being in Time by Heidegger. Let me pause for a moment and talk about that reading assignment. The introduction to Being in Time is about 60 pages long, and it is difficult. And I've tried to read it a few times before. I've started to read it a few times. There's a set of lectures by Dreyfus, who's a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, who teaches Heidegger. And a few years ago, his Berkeley lectures became available as podcasts. And they're wonderful. They really are good. He doesn't start with the introduction. And I can see why, because the introduction sort of assumes that you know what he's going to do and why he's going to do it. So I never read the introduction, and I never got very far in the book, right? This is one of those books like Finnegan's Wake, where I've been reading it for 20 years. I've been reading Being in Time for 10 years, and to this point, have probably actually read about 12 pages. So Being in Time, the introduction, I thought 60 pages, 10 hours, I'm going to alternate between writing and reading and then taking a nap. I thought 20, that's 10 hours, 10 writing sessions, 10 reading sessions, 10 napping sessions. Sounds pretty good to me. So that was my task. What happened, and I started right in. As soon as I thought, if I even wait for a few minutes when this train starts to kind of get settled, I'm never going to do it. So I started right in with reading. I thought I'm going to read. I'm going to mark up the book. I'm going to take notes. And what happened almost immediately was that I started taking notes on the printout that I had of the essays. And I realized that in those essays were spaces that needed Heidegger. And so what happened then was that instead of splitting the reading and the writing up, it became the same effort. And as I found notes in Heidegger, so things that jumped out, that seemed like I was going to want to remember it, I would mark it up in the book and I would write it down. And because I was writing not on the notebook that I'd brought, but on the pages of the essays, it made me move through the essays and think, well, this particular quote illuminates this particular section in my essays. And so probably in a half a dozen key places, I was able to pull together drafts of the essays with some Heidegger. And it's tough. It's a tough bit of reading. At the very end of the introduction, the last paragraph, Heidegger recognizes this. He acknowledges what he calls the awkwardness and inelegance of his language and grammar. And he gives a reason for it that refers to the type of material that he's talking about. But basically what he says is the language is awkward and inelegant because this is tough shit to talk about. I think that's exactly how he meant it. I do think that there's sort of a self-awareness in Heidegger that had never struck me before. He knows that what he's writing is fucked up and difficult. When I got to that point, which is at the very end, and I realized that Heidegger knows what he's doing, and he knows that what he's doing is difficult, I felt this relief. And it tied in with something else, because also towards the end, maybe on page 50, 55 of the introduction, Heidegger says that it all boils down to one slogan, and the slogan is, to the thing itself. To the thing itself. Now that makes sense, that everything else is trying to explain what the thing is, and what itself means, and all of the layers of complex human interpretation that prevents you from seeing itself, or that helps you from interacting and having discourse with the thing. And that the book is going to be about one kind of thing that has particular attributes of caring about what itself is. I thought, if you had started with that, Martin, if you had started with that and then said, okay, now this is going to be difficult, but bear with me for a bit here, and then gone through all that stuff that's in there about the history of ontology, right? There's this whole section that's just been like a brick wall for me, where it just feels like a chip on his shoulder. He's like, I've got this question about the thing, and nobody's talked about it before. And that bit, the nobody talking about it before, is 20 pages of, honestly, I felt like you had to know Kant and Aristotle before you could even approach Heidegger. But you don't need to know that. He does know it, I suppose, but I don't need to know it. I just need to know that he is telling me that the particular question he has is one that is not what other people have meant when they talk about ontology. Great. That's all I need to know. And then what does he mean? The hermeneutics of it that he talks about, the disclosure of being. These are terms that he uses. The universal phenomenological ontology. Some of these words I think he made up, and he uses them not because they mean anything, but because they feel something. Do you know what I mean? Like they're an incantation. And I think that if he was reading this in German in front of you, you would be spellbound and hypnotized. And I think that because I've just started reading a book by George Steiner, who I gather is a Heidegger expert. I believe the book was written in the early 90s or a little bit earlier. And he says exactly that. In fact, I think his whole book, when I've finished it, will really boil down to that point, that there's a linguistic magic in Heidegger that is part of the time of Germany and the Germanic style at that time, but that some of this stuff that's there is there because of the way that it feels, not because of what it means. There is meaning that can be peeled away, but it is functionally there to get you feeling a certain way. So here's an example. He's talking about phenomenology and a definition of phenomenology, and he breaks it up into two parts: the phenomenon and the logos. So the phenom and the ology. The phenomenon, he says, showing itself in itself is a distinctive way in which something can be encountered. And then the logos is a discourse with that distinctive way in which something can be encountered. The logos is a discourse that lets something be seen. Okay. So there's a really good, easy definition of phenomenology. And then he says, and this, I'm distilling, and those of you who are Heidegger experts, by all means, comment and correct me on this. But this is another case where I think if he had started with that and then filled in the rest, it would have been a lot easier to understand. He says this interpretation of apophantical discourse may suffice to clarify the primary function of logos. What the hell does that mean? I don't even know what apophantical discourse means. I don't think he does either, but it feels something. But here's what he's talking about when he talks about this interpretation. He says, phenomenology is that to let that which shows itself be seen from itself in the very way in which it shows itself from itself. So, in the very way is that discourse, the ability to let something be. I know I'm putting words in there that come from my Buddhist training and background, but Heidegger knew Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer knew his Buddhism, so I think it's okay to apply that to the discourse. Right? Phenomenology, the phenomenon showing itself in itself, which is difficult because we apply all kinds of inauthentic attributes and modes of being around that phenomenon, that entity. And then the logos, which is this type of discourse that seeks out the disclosure of particular attributes, which is that showing itself in itself. And the inquiry into this is unique to a particular type of self-aware consciousness that he calls Dasein. I just think if he'd done it that way, it would have been a whole lot easier. Okay, so that was the train ride out. Friday evening, the concert, the Philip Glass concert that I mentioned at Carnegie Hall, music with changing parts. So this was a 90-minute piece, no break, no movements, but his ensemble, which is at its core is, like, I think, 4 keyboards, a particular type of electronic keyboard. I think it was called the Farfisa, and I think that's what they were using up there. I don't think they were using new style digital keyboards. And they're up there doing their back and forth patterns, all 4 of them churning away. And then a small group of woodwinds, clarinet, a flute, I forget what else. And then a small choir made up of school choirs from San Francisco. And there was a second conductor who was conducting the choir. Then Michael Riesman, who was, as I said, the octogenarian music director, was also up there. There was a computer screen between the 2 conductors that counted up and down, which I think, I'm not sure who was controlling that, whether that was something that Riesman was hitting and adjusting, or if that was being updated by, like, the sound guy or something like that. But obviously the number of repetitions of certain sections is very key to all of Philip Glass's music, particularly this early stuff. Right? This was from the 70s when his ensemble was first exploring that style. He hadn't written the big pieces yet, the operas, the symphonies. His form was created for that ensemble. And it was great. And it was perfect to settle in and trance out for 90 minutes. There's so much activity going on in that piece that you need to sort of step outside a little bit of your own normal state and let these patterns emerge. I know this from playing the solo piano stuff, that on the paper it really does look like there's nothing but a bunch of triplets. But the changes that do take place and the overlapping of different rhythmic organization creates a shifting of pattern. But the shifting of patterns may be 30 seconds or a minute, and you've really got to listen in a different way to pick that up. It's not like doing detailed analysis. It's like letting the feeling of it flow through. So I approached the Philip Glass, I could say, in the same way that I approached Heidegger, which was, how does this make me feel, and what parts of it jump out that mean something to me now? And I'm going to assume that that's the correct meaning. Just to go back to the Heidegger for a second, I had posted something on Facebook about this train trip and that I was reading Heidegger. And I mentioned, and a few people commented on what they thought about that. And I mentioned in a second reply that I was marking up the book. And one of the commenters was surprised that I would do that, or mentioned that they could never think to do that themselves, to mark up a book. And this was because, what if I'm wrong? And it occurred to me that did never occur to me. It never occurred to me that what I wrote in the book is wrong, because I'm not doing it to take notes and pass a quiz. I'm taking it to highlight the things that jump out, recognizing that I don't know what the book means, but that there's stuff in there. And if something resonates, then that's its meaning. And do I think that will be different from someone else reading the book? Yes. Do I think that it will be alien to what they read in the book? I hope not. I hope I haven't misread it that wildly. But it's not a question of extracting a definitive understanding. It's a question of saying what jumps out. And if you see the way I mark up the book, it's often circles and lines between different paragraphs that in a way kind of create sort of parallel structures that suggest to me that there's related ideas in those paragraphs. And I think that's a very similar way to how I listen to Philip Glass, that I'm not counting as at 7 and 5 and 13 and 12 and 21 and whatever. I'm realizing that something has shifted, or that something now demands attention, and I might think, why does that? But often it's simply that it is demanding attention. So the Philip Glass was a nice transition from the experience of the train ride into the rest of the weekend. It sort of let all of the shaking patterns of a hectic week kind of find their own groove. It sort of like if you had dozens of marbles on a tray. The tray had marble-sized grooves in it. As you shake the tray, the marbles will fall into the grooves and then roll to their end resting point. That's how it felt with my mind and my brain and the Philip Glass. So I have heard Parsifal live once before, also down in D.C., with when Placido Domingo was the music director there, and he actually played the lead Parsifal then, and that was a wonderful experience. The production here at the Met is different. It's much the Domingo version looked like a sort of traditional Wagner, right, with tunics and sort of not Viking stuff, but medieval looking Wagnerian stuff. The Met performance took a very different approach and had very simple costumes, white shirts, gray trousers, jackets, white dresses, gray dresses, and the choreography of the choruses was meticulous and beautiful and lined up with the music. And I know that sounds like that's what choreography is supposed to do, but this is an opera. It's not a ballet. And it's unusual to see the large scales of the chorus or even of the soloists do something gesturally dramatic that actually does move with the music. And for the chorus in this production, that's very important, because a lot of the time what they're doing is mudras and hand gestures that are there to amplify the spiritual, mystical nature of their community in the first place. But also, I think, and this was one of the points I want to make about this performance, it's not right to use the word performance. It's not right to call this an opera. If I was awakened to the overwhelming power of Wagner when I heard the Ring Festival, here with Parsifal, I became aware that Wagner really did mean what people say about him. He really meant those resources to be transformative. We call it opera, but that was a ministerial liturgy, a mystical, weird vision that landed at the Met and then was experienced by that audience. And again, just highlighting a couple of the elements from the opera that felt something to me at the time, and so I will assume that they mean something. In this performance and this listening of Parsifal, the curse placed on Kundry, the woman, was very apparent. So Kundry is a woman who is cursed to perpetual reincarnation and alternating reincarnations woken by the wicked sorcerer character or by the Knights of the Holy Grail. And she's condemned to this because she laughed at Christ on the cross. That curse of immortality felt very real in this performance. And then in the final act, in the Good Friday act, where she and Gurnemanz, the old chief knight, whatever his title is, father knight, greet Parsifal after his years of wandering, and they together kind of anoint him. The vision was so intimate that then when Kundry actually dies because the Grail and the Spear have been reunited and her curse has been lifted, I guess because of her role in that, it is a gorgeous moment. It's heart-stopping. The idea of Parsifal as the pure fool enlightened by compassion, which we hear twice in the opera. At the beginning, when Parsifal first shows up, and he's just a dumb fuck. He shoots one of the special swans. He gets to witness the ritual of the Grail and doesn't even know what it is. He's just dumb. there's a danger in the production of Parsifal. I think that Parsifal never really looks anything other than dumb, because even when he returns, it's not like he's the one with reciting all the mystical wisdom. He's just the guy that gets to do the cool stuff because he's the one that regained the spear. He regained the spear because he's too dumb to even be seduced by the beautiful women in the castle of the evil sorcerer. That is probably a contentious interpretation of Parsifal, the character, but the idea, which I don't know that pure fool means really dumb, but enlightened by compassion, that is then restated when Parsifal comes back to the Hermitage. And in this performance, that transformation, the element of compassion was also really present. It was present in the way that they treat the wounded king, Amfortas, the way he's carried around on the stage. The singer gave a noble and gentle performance of Amfortas, which if the danger with the Parsifal character is that he just seems dumb all the time and not a pure fool, the danger with Amfortas is that he just becomes a bit of a whiner, because things are shitty for him. He's got this wound that won't heal. He's lost the spear. His community's falling around him. His father dies. It's rough. It's rough. But that never came across in this performance. Instead, this warmth. And then when the opera ends, that warmth just flowed from the stage. It was a liturgy. It wasn't a show. It was an experience. It's extraordinary. So there's a lot more to talk about for Parsifal, but those were the bits that hit me, and I felt like I'd been primed for it, right, with reading Heidegger, and then hearing Philip Glass, and then having a good night's sleep. Then 11 o'clock in the morning, Parsifal through to 5 o'clock. And then we took a break. It had started to snow, and it was really shitty snow. It was like slush falling from the sky. It made me very glad that I wasn't flying the next day, because that's the kind of weather conditions where LaGuardia just closes, and there's nothing you can do. There's no flights in or out. You're just stuck there. That's happened to me when I've traveled for work more times than I want to think. So I was delighted that I was going to be on the train the next day, and so could kind of appreciate this, falling slush. It was not sleet. It wasn't rain. It wasn't freezing rain. It really was. It hit the ground like someone had a thick spigot of slush that was spraying over everything. It's gross. But then we went to see the Valkyries. So there's a concert performance, which means that there's no staging. There are 3 singers in that act. There's Sieglinde, and Hundig. And Sieglinde is married to Hundig. And Sigmund, we don't know at first, is Sieglinde's long-lost twin brother. But he shows up fleeing from a band of warriors who are intent on killing him because he has just slaughtered a bunch of people, we find out, at a wedding. So he shows up. Sieglinde's in the house alone in the middle of the forest. By rights of hospitality, she offers him water, place to warm himself by the fire. Pretty quickly, you can tell that there's a vibe between the two of them. So when Hundig emerges from the forest, again, it doesn't take long before you realize that the pursuit that he's been engaged in is the pursuit that Siegmund has been escaping from. Hundig is bound by hospitality not to harm Sigmund while he's there. But he gives him until dawn the next day, at which point he says, I'm going to come for you and I'm going to slaughter you. I don't care you don't have a weapon and you're exhausted. You've got the night, but that's it. So the Act 1 works as a single concert. Now, this was it for the concert, because there's this trajectory for when Sigmund and Sieglinde meet. They tell each other their stories, with Hunding in there to kind of prompt it along a little bit and realize that Sigmund is the wolfing kid or guy that's been causing trouble, and that Hunding realizes that they have the same sneaky eyes and that they're looking at each other with those eyes. Then in the opera, in Valkyrie, the opera, Sigmund and Sieglinde run away together. They have a child, Siegfried, who is then the third opera is called Siegfried. So I don't want to give any spoilers. But in that first act, this is their discovery of each other and their recognition that they love each other. In that mythical world, there is evidently no taboo about incest. In fact, it seems to be a positive indicator of success. Hunding, having resigned himself to the rules of hospitality, orders up a drink. Says he's going to go drink this. You go to sleep. I'm going to kill you in the morning. Sieglinde comes out and says, "Okay, Hunding's fine. I've drugged his drink. He's going to sleep all night. So let's get it on. Let's figure this out. What are we going to do? You don't have a weapon." And then there's this sort of spring music, that comes in, and the position that had seemed so dire starts to seem illuminated by magic. Because Sigmund realizes that his father was the guest at Sieglinde's wedding. Don't try and keep track of the story, but when Sieglinde got married, some old guy with one eye showed up, stuck a great big honking sword in the middle of a tree, which is at the center of Hunding's house. And no one could pull it out. Sieglinde seems to have no doubt that Sigmund will be the one who can pull it out, and then he'll have this awesome sword that he'll be able to use to defend himself the next day against Hunding, and everyone else is going to come after him. And sure enough, yep, he can pull it out, this awesome magical sword that he names Notung, which means needful. And again, without spoiling anything, later in the third opera, Siegfried demonstrates his awesomeness by being able to reforge Notung, because Notung is broken when Wotan has to disavow both Sigmund and Sieglinde. That is a bit of a spoiler, but I figure you all know this. So the impact of this performance was also remarkable. I was a bit hesitant at first because a concert performance of a single act, but it is perfect. The whole story, it ends with them announcing their love. He's got the sword. Everything's going to be okay the next morning when Hunding comes after them, because there's no doubt that Sigmund is a badass. He can take on anyone. They figured out that they're twins. They figured out that they love each other, and they're going to go off and have a baby. And you can imagine that somewhere up in Valhalla, Wotan is sitting there thinking, yep, now it's all coming together. I'm going to create a race of heroes that will get my ring back and then fuck off everybody. Right? So it works, right? It was like rocket. It was like a rocket launch. It starts quietly and murmuring, and you're sort of like, what now? What's going on? Oh, wait, they're twins? Wait, don't do that. Whoa. And then Hunding's there, and like, oh, it's not going to end well. And then he gets the sword, and then there's this sort of enormous launch when they've got everything just ready to go. And at the end of it, the singer So it was set so you had the conductor in the middle, right, and then Hundig on his left, so my right, and then on the other side were the two lead singers, Sigmund and Sieglinde. And at the end of it, they turned to each other on the stage and just embraced, and then gave each other this massive smooch. Like, I mean, it felt like it went on forever. They were fully committed to that performance, and they were both Wagnerian style singers, which means they had some physical presence that was just beautiful and magnificent. God, they could sing the hell out of that music. And then in the end, that embrace and smooch, the whole everybody in the audience, it was riotous. I mean, this maybe is how everybody in New York responds to the New York Philharmonic. I don't know. We don't do that here in Pittsburgh. We like our Pittsburgh Symphony, and there's plenty of times when I hear sort of a solitary bravo, but this hall went absolutely apeshit crazy for the performance, and they really should have. And here's the thing. We had, my father and I had gone there. We checked the review from the Thursday performance, and what's his name? Andy Thomasino is a really great writer. I enjoy his stuff a lot. Had said that this performance was flaccid. Like, that was his word. And we both looked at each other afterwards. It was like, I mean, obviously the performance was very different. It must have been very different on Saturday, because the last word that you would choose is flaccid. It was explosive. It really was like watching the shuttle take off, where, you know, how you see all the steam at the beginning, and then it starts to move up, and then it looks like it's not going to move up any further, and then the next thing you know, it's 3 miles up in the air, and the thing, you know, that's what this performance felt like. It was absolutely marvelous. And to the question, is there such a thing as too much Wagner? No. As long as you take a break and get a little bit of bite to eat, and then, you know, it was 10 o'clock. We'd been listening to Wagner for most of 12 hours with a couple of intermissions and time for dinner. And it was the perfect amount of Wagner for a single day. So there you go. Heidegger, Wagner, train rides, Philip Glass. It was a great trip, and a great experience. I'll have more about Heidegger, because what I thought I was going to do now for the last part of this episode was just go ahead and read you a section of the essays, particularly where I had incorporated some of the Heidegger, but I'm seeing that I'm already up. This is already kind of a long episode, so I will still do that, because why not? It's just time to share some of this material, but I'm not going to do it today. I'll do it for the next episode, and maybe read a longer section and have that be the bulk of the next episode. The other thing that I'm going to do on my YouTube channel coming up, if you listen to this, what that is me flicking a big cardboard box that's sitting in front of me that just arrived from Perfect Circuit Audio, which is an awesome store. I had been spending the last few months carefully piecing together the modules for my new Eurorack synthesizer setup. And yesterday I took the plunge and finally ordered everything that I'd been building up in my wish list. And it has arrived today, so I have 9 modules that I'm going to put in my new case. And I'm thinking I might do a little video. I've seen people do unboxing videos. I might do something like that and kind of let you see what it looks like. And then as I do that, talk about why each of the modules, why I chose them, and what I'm hoping to do with them. I'm enormously intimidated by it right now, but I kind of feel like this is another step in the unfolding creative process. I'm thinking of this synthesizer as a little animal of its own, with its own heart, its own spirit. And you'll see why when I talk through it. It doesn't have a keyboard. I'm not interested in constructing a specific type of performance instrument. I'm looking for something that will behave in particular kinds of ways. So more to come on that, but that will be on my YouTube channel in the next few days. There's another episode of the Urban Bella book coming out this weekend, so it's been quiet for the last week or 10 days, but there's 3 or 4 things coming out in the next 3 to 5 days. Keep an eye out for that. Please go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. It makes a difference if you do that. Subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference if you do that. And then check out my Facebook page. I'm not sure what's been happening there lately, but there is definitely an uptick in people following that page. So if that's you, thank you. I appreciate it. And then last of all, the kind of the central place, go to zenglop.net. It's my webpage. You can easily find all the videos and podcast episodes there, as well as other musical stuff. There's a link to my Bandcamp site where you can hear a lot of the music that I talk about here as a composer. So, thank you very much, and keep your wits about you. Zenglop the Podcast. Conversations with an Aesthetic Alien. A podcast where we talk about music, poetry, and psychogeography.